Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this is our number 4 session, Real Talk on Palestine. I am so honored and excited to welcome our very special guest and friend, Lara, and also known as Gazan Girl. That's her social media handle on Instagram. She is a Palestinian lawyer and activist. We had a conversation back in May of 2021. So it's been over 2.5 years. It does not feel like that. It feels more like 2.5 minutes. Back then we talked about things Palestine and what was going on. She's been on the front lines, obviously, for a very long time. She has family from there. We'll hear more about, what's been happening on, the side of her family, but she's also been very, very active on social media. We know that with everything going on in Palestine, that's really been the best place where we've been able to get real news about what's happening on the ground. It is an extremely hard role, obviously, to play because you're receiving all kinds of images that, from family and friends. We who don't, not on the first line of getting those kinds of images, we can choose not to open them, but I'm sure where, Lara is sitting, she has to open and look at everything. And it's extremely painful because what little we do see is devastating. And so, it's a really brave, very important role that she's playing, the lifeline from Gaza, but it's also, a window for us from this distance to see what's happening, frustrating. And so I'm so grateful. We are all very grateful for everything that Laura has been doing. She also is the co-host of a podcast called Palestine Pod. And she has a co-host, a Jewish American comedian. So it'd be really interesting to know. I'm sure, that probably has taken a backseat to all of the stuff going on right now. But I just wanted to by asking, Laura for people who are not familiar with her work or, her background, if you could take a moment just to tell us about, like what you were doing before October 7th, and how everything has changed since then, and tell us about your family. And also we got some really bad news about some of your family history today. So I'm going to turn it over to you and just let us know what it feels like in your shoes going.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much, Grace, for the invitation to be here with you today. I just want to be clear that you can hear me properly before I begin. Perfect. Okay. So your first question was, what have I been doing since October 7th? And the answer to that question is more of what I usually do. And that is that usually I take to social media in order to correct the narrative about the nature of the Palestinian struggle. And I have been using social media as a tool in that sense for years now. I also, as you said, am a co-host of a weekly English language podcast where we provide commentary, analysis, interviews, look into the history of the Palestinian struggle, and assess where we're going in the future. And all of that is with the aim of supporting the decolonization of Palestine and the Palestinian struggle for freedom and liberation. In the last month, I have focused more on the social media aspect of things because of the sheer necessity and urgency of what we have been seeing. And if I may, I would like to quote from the letter of resignation of Craig Mochaber, who was the director of the New York office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the United Nations, and who in late October resigned from his position due to the way the institution had been dealing with the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And he very accurately summarized the situation before us today. He said that this is a, quote, textbook case of genocide, and that, quote, the European ethno-nationalist settler colonial project in Palestine has entered its final phase towards the expedited destruction of the last remnants of indigenous Palestinian life in Palestine. What's more, the governments of the United States, the United Kingdom, and much of Europe are wholly complicit in this horrific assault. Not only are these governments refusing to meet their treaty obligations, to ensure respect for the Geneva Conventions, but they are in fact actively arming the assault, providing economic and intelligence support, and giving political and diplomatic cover for Israel's atrocities. In concert with this, Western corporate media, increasingly captured and state adjacent, are in open breach of Article 20 of the ICCPR, continuously dehumanizing Palestinians to facilitate the genocide and broadcasting propaganda for war and advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, and violence. As a result of all of this, I have needed to spend almost every minute of every day on social media correcting the narrative and amplifying the voices of Palestinians who are on the ground in Gaza right now and who are documenting their ongoing genocide. And what I do is I collate all of that information from all of the sources of citizen journalists on the ground who every day are reporting where Israeli airstrikes are taking place, how many Palestinians have been killed, showing us photos, showing us videos, showing us the most gruesome scenes that we could never imagine. In our wildest nightmares, we could never imagine these scenes, but they play out before us every day, minute after minute. And what I do is I broadcast that to my followers, to my audience, in an attempt to show the world what is actually happening in Gaza, Palestine, during this genocide that is being committed by Israel with the full support, as Craig Mohiber's resignation letter said, of the Western powers of this world. And so your second question was to ask me, well, what has been going on with my family? Like every Palestinian from Gaza, my own family has suffered losses due to the sheer number of civilians that Israel has slaughtered. And actually, moments before I logged on to this, one of my cousins shared with me a Google document that she started in order to keep track of all of our extended family who has now been killed from the different families that make up our extended family. And I was looking at this Google document and I was scrolling through it. So you can imagine the numbers are just astonishing. 2 days ago, I was at Gaza for family members that were killed in an Israeli airstrike on their home. 3 generations of the family were killed. And then when 2 brothers went to go to the site to see if they could dig up any survivors with their hands, Israel carried out another airstrike, killing those 2 brothers. Those are people from the Al Rayes family who are part of my extended family. And I made the comment on social media that Israel's targeting of the Al Rayes family in Gaza is akin to targeting the family in the United States like the Kennedys, because they are a prominent Gazan family, highly educated, and for them to slaughter the 3 generations of that family and then those who came to look for survivors is a clear attempt to instill fear in the Gazan population that nobody is safe, not even those members of Gazan society who one would think might have a chance at safety, right? Because we're seeing them attack refugee camps, wantonly drop thousands of tons of explosives. No, everybody in Gaza is a target. And in fact, they have told us very clearly that everybody in Gaza is a target because Israeli leaders at the highest levels of state have day in and day out in media appearances globally confirmed to us that all Palestinians in Gaza are a legitimate target because they have made statements saying that the focus is not on accuracy, it is on quote unquote destruction. They have told us that Palestinians are human animals, and then they have told us that Palestinians are inhuman animals, and then they have told us that Palestinians, well, it would be an insult to animals to equate us with animals. Other government leaders have told us that they question this notion that there are civilians in Gaza because no, in fact, there are no civilians in Gaza. And so it has been very clear by listening to the language of the Israeli leaders themselves who they are targeting in these assaults. And we know that that has been proven true because every time there is an assault, it's on a family's house, which is why if you follow me on Instagram, you see that day in and day out, I am announcing that this family's house was targeted in an airstrike, and now the entire family has been wiped out. To date, over 850 families have been wiped off of the civil registry in Gaza. That means that the family no longer exists. Their family history stopped in 2023 because Israel massacred all living members of the family together in an airstrike on their home, because that's who they're targeting. They're targeting our families. And so, yes, there have been horrific losses in my own extended family, but that is not unique. That is the situation of everybody who is from Gaza. I have heard of truly mind-numbing numbers. I saw an interview with a Palestinian woman who said that she lost over 80 members of her own family, and it's just impossible to even begin to calculate what that trauma and that loss must feel like. And last night, we actually learned this morning that Israeli airstrikes targeted and destroyed completely the El Borno Mosque, which is near Al Shifa Hospital, which is a mosque that my family built. My great uncles and my great aunts built that mosque in Gaza City as a Sadaqa Jariyah for my great grandparents, and that mosque was hit in an airstrike yesterday. And so my grandmother's childhood home was also destroyed in Israeli airstrikes. The list of loss and destruction is at times too long to even. I wonder if I'm actually remembering everything, and I don't want to forget everything. So there is this also anxiety about have I actually told you everything? So you can imagine that after 35 some days now of genocide, the situation is very, very dire. And in fact, I would also like to emphasize, and maybe this is the last thing I say before we move on, that in the last 2 days, Israel's focus has been on the health infrastructure, has been on targeting hospitals in relentless bombardment. They have installed snipers in the Al Shifa hospital who have been sniping civilians and health workers. Entire hospitals have shut down and had to fully evacuate because of the bombardment. We have seen images and videos of the Indonesian hospital facing severe bombardment. We were told that babies who were alive because of incubators began to die because of the lack of fuel, because of the total siege on fuel and electricity that Israel has imposed on Gaza in this last month of genocide. We have seen bombing of the Al Shifa hospital courtyard where families were sheltering. We have seen bombing of the maternity ward of Al Shifa hospital. We saw the entire Al Rantisi hospital and the Al Nasser hospital for children be besieged and circled by Israeli tanks and suffer shelling. And so we are seeing that very clearly. Israel, who just weeks ago told us that it couldn't have possibly carried out the Al Ahli massacre and killed over 500 Palestinians, now has without fail been targeting hospitals and health workers every single day since. And the entire medical infrastructure in the north part of Gaza has completely collapsed, completely, in the last couple of days.
There, it leaves you completely numb. I don't even know that, and the world is complicit. It's like it is, everyone is seeing this before our eyes. And I'd like to know, where, like, you're getting reports from all parts, I assume, of Palestine, and like, I guess when you start seeing like how many people are pouring out on the streets, like I know today there was a huge protest in London that people were reporting, 1 million people showed up. And then all around the world, you see, this, I think, the world sentiment, but that doesn't seem to change anything in terms of the reality on the ground. Um, what are your thoughts about, like, what do you even tell people, when your family is reaching out, and like, how do you even survive this mentally, emotionally, like, I have so many questions and no questions, it's like leaves you completely speechless. Um,
Well, I think you've highlighted something which maybe even Sheikh can speak to better than I can, which is the divide between the global north and the global south. We know very well that the people around the world are supportive of the Palestinian struggle for freedom because it mirrors their own struggle for freedom against oppressive governments and against um, colonialism, because that's what this is. The Palestinian struggle is an anti-colonial struggle. We are people who are fighting for freedom on our land against a settler colony, which established itself on our land and denies us access to our land, has stolen our land, and prevents us from returning to our land. Um, and so it is very much, I would say, a phenomenon of the post World War II era that you have Western governments and institutions which purport to support values like democracy and human rights and universal human rights, but at the same time the actions that they support globally severely undermine those very same values that they claim to embody. And in this sense, I think it's good for us to talk about a recent action on November 8th, which was brought by 3 Palestinian NGOs as claimants. They petitioned the International Criminal Court to, 1, issue arrest warrants for the 7 Israeli officials who are carrying out this genocide, and 2, investigate the crimes of genocide and the apartheid regime, which Israel oversees. And I posted about it on social media, and of the over 1,000 comments on the post, the sentiment was singular, and that was the ICC will never, never heed your call to investigate genocide, even though it is the overwhelming consensus of scholars of genocide, legal scholars of genocide. 2 weeks into this, Raz Siegel, who's a Jewish genocide scholar, a scholar of the Holocaust, said that this was a, quote, textbook case of genocide. As a lawyer, when you look at the Convention on Genocide and you read the definition, the legal definition of what constitutes genocide, you will see very clearly that what is happening in Gaza is far beyond genocide. The threshold, the legal threshold for genocide has been met and exceeded, right? So what this illustrates is that the people who have the power have allowed a culture of impunity to be the rule for when they break the law. The law only applies to people of color who break the law. The law is only relevant to those who are enemies of the West, people like Putin, for example. But the law does not apply to the US or the EU or Israel, which is, a US military outpost in the Middle East, essentially. The law does not apply to these actors. And in fact, one of the most frustrating phenomenon that we have seen out of the just insane things that we have seen in the last month has been the US's attempt to justify or excuse what is happening by reference, for example, to international law. And then when pressed, well, what law are you speaking about? Because actually under the 4th Geneva Conventions, which applies here, Israel does not have the right to defend itself against attacks emanating from occupied territory. So are you referring to another law? And if so, what is that law? Define which law you are referring to. And the US State Department spokesperson who was interrogated in this way by journalist Sam Husseini could not identify what law he was referring to that would authorize or allow Israel to act in this way. I mean, this is just insane. And what this really means is that if the International Criminal Court does not act in this case, when a situation of genocide has never actually been clearer, and there's never been more evidence for it. I mean, this is what I'd like people to understand, is that what we are seeing now in Gaza is unique in the sense that there has never been more evidence, photographic and video, of a genocide ever in history. Okay, so that's one. Number two, is that the sheer amount of killing of civilians and the fact that the UN has called Gaza now a graveyard for children, not only are the majority of people being killed, actually all of them civilians, but the majority of them are children. So this is a genocide against Palestinian children. And yet the US and the world powers continue to excuse and distort and frame this as a question of self-defense, when in fact it is very clearly not. 3, all legal scholars have said that when it comes to making a case for genocide, the most difficult thing to demonstrate is the aspect of intent, because genocide requires action and also intent. And so oftentimes we have action, but we don't have genocidal intent. Whereas here, I have a spreadsheet of genocidal intent expressed at the highest levels of Israeli state. So when you combine all of this together, you realize that if the ICC does not act in this moment, does not investigate genocide, does not issue arrest warrants, does not prosecute Israel for genocide, then it will have failed to accomplish the sole thing which it was established in order to accomplish, which is to prevent and sanction genocide. That is literally the sole purpose of the court. If the court cannot accomplish that in the clearest case of genocide that we have ever seen, where the evidence is all there, the intent is there, the photos, the videos showing the destruction, showing the impact on civilians, showing the families being pulled from the rubble, it's all there. If it cannot act in this case, then it will essentially render obsolete, ineffective, and totally irrelevant the entire body of law developed after World War II in order to prevent and sanction genocide. You can take your international human rights law book, your international humanitarian law book, and throw it in the trash, because the system does not work. It does not work. Everything I studied is nothing. That to me is what is at stake here. And that to me is what I tell people. This is a moment, this is a testing moment for the international institutions which govern this world. Either they will act and they will demonstrate that they are capable of actually accomplishing that which they were created to do, or they will not act and they will further confirm their total inefficacy and uselessness for the world and render themselves completely and totally illegitimate. And it will be something that they will never be able to bounce back from. So that's what's at stake here. If you don't care about thousands of Palestinians' children who have been murdered while they were sleeping, then fine. But your legitimacy as an organization, as an institution, the entire international law framework is also at risk here through your inaction. And so this to me is something that this is a message I have been trying to send, because what is the purpose of it all? If you cannot prevent genocide, if you cannot sanction genocide, throw it all away. Throw the entire system away.
It's so true. And even the way, I mean, I know Sheikh will comment, but even the way people are able to think, you can just kill anyone. Today, there was a report, apparently, an Israeli outfit called Honest Reporting, which is not actually a journalist site, said that there were 4 journalists that shared pictures of October 7th. And so maybe they were actually involved in the organization of October 7th. And so the Israeli state media picked it up and added them to their kill list, just like that. Okay, what happened? What's the point of law? You just start killing anyone and just decide based on nothing. But that's, yeah, I mean, this is exactly the point. So we all revert back to a tribal system where anyone can kill anyone for any reason without any consequence.
No, there are clearly no rules, and that's the inherent logic of a deeply racist system. Now, when it comes to the Palestinian people, there are inherently just no rules. I mean, one of the just when Laura was speaking earlier today, some 30 Palestinian children died because of the lack of oxygen. And you're talking about children who were alive who needed oxygen, and Israel is not just preventing the delivery of fuel to Gaza, but Israel is systematically bombing even the solar panels that provides, I mean, hospitals that have solar panels, and you are targeting these solar panels to make sure this is clear genocidal logic. I mean, because there's no military purpose. There's absolutely, you're destroying solar panels on a hospital, and it is truly mind-boggling. And the other thing, those like State Department people are often talking as if the issue is whether Israel has the right to self-defense or does not have the right to self-defense. But the very paradigm after World War II is that humanity was supposed to have learned from the brutality of the two world wars that even when nations exercise self-defense, there are limits as to what the nations may do as they are practicing self-defense. So even if one concedes that Israel has a right to self-defense, it doesn't mean that Israel has the right to commit genocide as it is defending itself. I mean, it's just, and just because you say I am in pursuit of what I consider to be criminals, or just because you believe that your target enemy has mixed with civilian populations, because these are, even if you make these claims, it does not mean that you have a license to kill wounded people, for instance. It does not mean that you have the right to target, to cut off water or electricity, or to prevent delivery of food to civilian populations. It does not mean that you can target ambulances. It does not mean that you can target people who are trying to move. You tell people to move from the north to the south, and then as they are trying to escape, you murder them. But I think there is the disturbing logic. Is I keep hearing in Israeli media these days constant references. Even Netanyahu equated Palestinians to Amalekites. I mean, there's constant biblical references to people who are condemned in the Bible, who were not just vanquished, but literally exterminated under the guise of God's authority. God authorized the extermination of these people. And so every time there's a reference that equates Palestinians to Amalekites, it's a genocidal reference. What you're saying is, in the same way that in the Bible the Amalekites were exterminated, we have cause to exterminate these people. And none of it. I mean, I listen to people in the American media. It's amazing. I mean, not even a pause, not even, this is deeply troubling. How can you make how can you make this connection? Aren't you justifying the logic of extermination under the clear? I mean, the entire Western, supposedly, the enlightened secular West is supposed to be troubled by religious extremism. The problem that the West has with Islamists is that they might use God's authority to justify violence, right? But here it is happening night and day. at every level of Israeli government and society, all over the Israeli media. And no reactions, no moral stands, nothing, absolutely nothing. Which it's truly terrifying. It's as if we wake up and we discover that the entire pretense of having outgrown barbarism was just like that, a pretense. That when all said and done, at the heart of it, people remained as savage, as barbaric, as intolerant, as religiously fanatic as they ever been. The problem, and this, I mean, the unbelievable, I mean, we just had the Arab Summit. Come out was zero. Muslim Summit come out was zero. 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. And the incredible weakness of Muslims is evident for everyone to see. Even the deconstruction and the collapse of the human rights system, the entire edifice of human rights and prohibitions against criminal wars or unjust wars, even because the way you conduct wars, even if we say you have a just cause, but the way you conduct war could make the war unjust anyway. The entire collapse of this, and I think of who are going to be the ultimate victims of this collapse. I mean, China is going to look at what the Israelis are doing and the way that the US backed Israel, are going to say, you have no moral grounds to stand on as we exterminate Uyghur Muslims. We are not even going to bother. Listen, fanatic Hindus in India are going to say, well, if Israel can exterminate Palestinians and the West, no one has any moral ground to stand on as we exterminate Muslims in India. Everywhere, leave alone places like Burma and the Rohingyas, everywhere that Muslims are consistently the vulnerable people in this world. As a Palestinian, Laura, I mean, how do you, I mean, if you imagined Muslims making stands that are truly consistent with their Islam, how would that world look to you?
Every Muslim country would have no relations whatsoever with Israel. That's how it would look. It would be an action. It would be, we saw Bolivia cut all official ties with Israel as a result of this genocide. And the fact that it's Bolivia and not a Muslim country which did that speaks volumes about the status of where we are in this so-called Muslim world. I was floored, but not surprised, when I saw that at the Islamic Arab Summit, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Saudi Arabia rejected a draft proposal for an oil embargo and a ban on the US using their airspace to transport arms to Israel. I mean, this is such a little ask. Just don't let the US fly over your airspace when it's transporting arms to kill Palestinian children. Just don't let them use your airspace. This is such a meek ask. This requires no spine to even agree to, and they couldn't even agree to that. The Muslim countries have power in where they have money, and imposing an embargo on oil would be a strong statement. But they couldn't even agree on that because money and profit is more valuable to them, is more relevant to them than the lives of Palestinian children. And honestly, when I see that, and at the same time, I see videos coming out of Gaza, and the people are saying, وين البلاد العربية؟ وين الحكام العرب?
Where the
How
Arab
many
world?
videos?
Where's the Arab
How
world?
many videos? How many videos have I seen with people exasperated, screaming this? And I sit there and I think to myself, do these people who are making these decisions even have the right to consider themselves Muslim? Why do they pray 5 times a day? What is that even for? Just stop. Stop. It's a farce. It's all a farce. It's all fake. It's all it meets the exact definition of who we know in Islam are the hypocrites. They say that they are Muslim, but they are not Muslim in anything but name and identity and the label that they have chosen for themselves. But their actions are completely against the call for justice, which is the heart of Islam. And so it is deeply distressing to see that this is the reaction of Muslim leaders. But to be perfectly honest, I don't even consider them Muslim to begin with. And maybe that is a position which, in Islam, it's not on me to decide who is Muslim or not. And I'm aware of that. But I feel so deeply let down by these actions, which are so clearly supportive of what I have just described as the most obvious case of genocide in recent history. So how else could I feel?
You're 100% dead on. I mean, I don't think, fine, you judge people by their actions, and you are absolutely entitled and rightfully so. I think that this moment is exactly a red line moment. It's, in some ways, it's made life very clear and very easy. And I think it's beyond any label. I mean, because, if you can't even say, don't use our airspace, that doesn't cost you anything. I mean, okay, how much more proof do you need that you're not on the side of justice, you're not on the side of God, you're not on the side of your Muslim brothers? I mean, this is just, Islam 101 from the Quran. So I feel perfectly fine in saying you are not Muslim if you are not preventing the genocide that is taking place. How much clearer can we make it? So from my perspective, okay, what can we do, right? Like, okay, people are boycotting Starbucks. Is that going to actually do? I mean, it's great, but does that do anything?
The single most important thing that anybody can do in this moment is be extremely vocal about their political solidarity with Palestinians facing genocide and extermination right now. That is the single most important thing that you can do, which is more important than donating, because as we have seen, Israel has imposed a total siege on Gaza for over a month now, almost no food and almost no water and no electricity and no fuel has entered Gaza. So if you are donating, that money is not necessarily reaching people in Gaza. People are starving to death in Gaza. There have already been deaths from starvation and dehydration due to the total siege which has been imposed. I have read that Gazans are living off of the equivalent of 2 pieces of bread a day, and many families are going days without eating. Children are losing weight. There is no formula. There is no clean water for formula. Mothers are not making breast milk because there's no water for them to drink. So the situation, and this is, I want to be very clear, the direct result of Israeli policy of total siege, which has prevented food and water and fuel and electricity from being made available to people in Gaza. They cut off the water. There is no water coming out of the faucets. They prevented the entry of food. What is coming in now is a trickle. Before October 7th, people need to understand that even before October 7th, 97% of the water in Gaza was unfit for human consumption. Before October 7th, Israel had put Gazans on a calorie-restricted diet. They had calculated the amount of calories they needed to allow into Gaza to avoid total starvation, and they would let in a slightly higher number than that. That was a military policy, and that was revealed in an Israeli military document. Before October 7th, Gaza was set to be unlivable by 2020, according to the United Nations. So what you are seeing is the complete suffocation of a people who, for the last 16 years, have already been under siege, and that this is, as Craig Mulhaber says, this is the last step of their extermination. So it's very important for us to keep in mind that the single most important thing that you can do right now is not donate. It is political solidarity. It is be extremely vocal. And we know that that works. Why? Because people are facing retaliation when they speak up, whether it be on the part of social media companies, which are censoring our voices, deleting our posts, suspending our accounts. There is a clear campaign of censorship on the part of social media. And this is not new, by the way. This was confirmed in October 2021 by a Human Rights Watch report, which found that Israel was disproportionately censoring and deleting content from Palestinian creators for reasons that were not justified. And this has been reported and confirmed also in an investigation that was done by Meta into its own practices. They confirmed that they disproportionately deleted and censored Palestinian content. So that clearly works. People who have voiced solidarity with Palestinians are in this moment losing their jobs in troves. There have been people getting fired for expressing statements of solidarity against people undergoing genocide. Clearly, the powers that be are afraid of people speaking up. And that is what we need most in this moment, because they can't fire all of us. And so when we are united in a mass movement from the grassroots, we are strong. And that is what we need. We need you to go to marches. We need you to be very vocal. We need you, everybody in their own life has power in certain spaces. And we need you to use the power that you have in the spaces that you occupy, whether it be at home, with your families, at work, in the community groups that you're a part of, and to be very clear about your position, to do your part to educate those around you, to amplify the voices of Palestinians on the ground, to make sure that people are getting their information about what is happening from Palestinians, to counter the racist trope that we are not reliable narrators of our own oppression. Because for decades, the Western powers and corporate media have dehumanized Palestinians to the point where nobody cares that thousands of Palestinians were massacred in a month, that over 300 Palestinians, civilians a day are being killed, the majority of whom are children. That's at a rate which far exceeds any armed conflict in modern history. There was an article about this done in Mondoweiss, which spoke about how this, just in terms of numbers, the amount of Palestinian civilians being killed per day far exceeds what we know in any sort of mass armed conflict in recent history. There is a strong impetus for us. We need to show up in this moment. And the way to show up is to speak up. Call for a ceasefire. Harass your representatives. Show up at their offices. Orchestrate actions of civil disobedience. Occupy their offices. Say that you're not going to leave. Make sure their phones are ringing off the hook. Make sure they can't go out to dinner in public without being harassed about why they haven't supported a ceasefire when over 4,500 Palestinian children were massacred. And by the way, yes, it happened. We have their names. We provided all of their names after Joe Biden sowed doubt and said he doesn't trust the numbers coming out of the Palestinian Health Ministry. We provided a list of every single name and age of every single person killed, including the 4,500 children now that have been killed in this genocide. And then we even had entities like The Guardian come out and say, no, historically, Palestinians have been accurate when reporting on their casualties in prior Israeli aggressions. Can you understand the level of the discourse? We have to sit here and prove that we are reliable narrators about the numbers of us when we are killed. And we have to show the receipts from how we have been reliable the previous times that we've been killed. But nobody is asking why we're being killed in the first place. The problem is that to the average American, They have no idea why Palestinians have grievances of any kind. And what the corporate media and the Western powers want you to believe is that Palestinians are motivated by one thing only, and that is that they hate Jewish people. That's what they want you to believe. That the Palestinians' sole purpose in this life is that they wake up and they hate Jewish people. But the reality is nobody has provided you with any context. Nobody has told you what has happened in that Palestinian person's life. Nobody has told you that their grandparents were expelled from their homes by Zionist militias in 1948, and that over 530 Palestinian cities and villages were completely razed to the ground and erased in order for Israel to establish itself as a country on our land. Nobody told you that. That might be relevant information for you to have before you were to decide whether or not it would matter if thousands of Palestinians were massacred in this moment. Nobody has told you that the Palestinians who were killed in the Jabalia refugee camp are refugees because of Israel. Israel made them refugees 75 years ago, pushed them into Gaza, that Israel sits on top of their homes. Nobody told you that. And that the same entity which made them refugees 75 years ago is now bombing them today in unrelentless bombardment, which does not end, which has pulverized Gaza, according to use the words of Amnesty International. Nobody has told you that. And that same entity also prevents them from leaving. One of the biggest myths that we have seen propagated time and again in this genocide is that Israel told Gazans to evacuate. It's been repeated over and over and over by politicians, by journalists, and nobody has asked a very simple question. Israel told people in Gaza to evacuate to the south. Is the south safe? The answer is no. It's a clear, resounding no. The south has been hit in incessant, uninterrupted, continuous bombardment every single day of this genocide. There is numerous photographic and video evidence of families being pulled out of the rubble of their homes in the south, the Nusayrat refugee camp, also numerous strikes in Rafah, in Khan Yunis, on the escape routes to the south. The south is not safe. My family is in the south, and every voice note that I get from them has the sound of Israeli drones and bombardment in the back. The second question that a journalist, if they were exercising a minimum of diligence in their job, should ask is, can Palestinians leave Gaza? No, they can't. No, they cannot. They are completely caged. Gaza is an extermination camp. There have been almost no Palestinians which have escaped Gaza since the beginning of this genocide. For the first several days, Israel bombed the Rafah crossing, which is the only way out of Gaza. They bombed it multiple times. And guess what? Even when they opened it, it was only open to a few foreign passport holders. The majority of Gazans don't have foreign passports. The majority of them are stateless, like all of us, like the rest of Palestinians who are stateless because the state which was established on their land excluded them from it. This is a really relevant context which we do not know. If you are an average American trying to consume information from corporate media and make up your mind about what is the situation with Palestinians, you do not know any of this. And I think this is really relevant information for people to understand. Instead, what we see is anchors on Fox News confusing Palestinians with Pakistanis.
Oh my God.
I posted that clip earlier today. That is the level of the discourse in the mainstream corporate media where people are getting their information and forming opinions. And so when Sheikh is telling us that nobody cares that Palestinians have been killed in mass, it's simply because they have been conditioned and taught and indoctrinated not to care by decades of anti-Palestinian racism and dehumanization. They have taught Americans that we are a people who do not deserve to live. They have ingrained in them the belief that not only is our life meaningless, but our death is inevitable. Our massacre cannot be prevented. Our massacre is necessary. When people are calling for a ceasefire, they're being met with responses like absolutely not. That would just let Hamas win. Ha ha ha. A chuckle. Joe Biden chuckled at the notion of a ceasefire in a video I saw the other day. And when the representative of the National Security Office, I forget his name, John Kirby, National Security Advisor, is asked in October, are there any red lines for Israel? No red lines. He's asked again on November 7th. You said in late October that you would not be drawing any red lines for Israel. Has your position in that regard changed? Nope, there are still no red lines. Well, that position is completely inconsistent with the reality of international law. Genocide is a red line. In fact, you don't even have to go as far as genocide. Mere incitement to genocide, where you don't even have to kill one person, is a red line under international law. Complicity in genocide is a red line under international law. So many actions short of genocide that constitute war crimes are a red line under international law. In this aggression, we have seen Israel kill over 35 Palestinian journalists and expressly state to media companies that they cannot guarantee the safety of their correspondents in Gaza. Issue express statements to media companies to say that your journalists are at risk because we will kill them. They killed Wael Dahdouf's entire family. And then the next day, they went on Israeli media and they said that his family was a target in response to a question by an anchor saying, do you know who you're targeting? They said, yeah, we know exactly what we're targeting. For example, yesterday, the journalist's house was a target. They are admitting that they are targeting journalists. That is a war crime. You are not.
They killed like 30 members of his family, right?
They killed his wife and his children. I don't know about extended family, but they killed the most important members of his family. And the next day he was out reporting again on the genocide. They killed over 35 Palestinian journalists. So not only are they committing a genocide against us, but they are also trying to prevent us from telling the world that we are being genocided. And that is why it is so essential for people to exercise political solidarity in this moment and to use their voices. It matters more than they think.
Laura, I mean, I you know, as a Muslim theologian, of course, I mean, as a lawyer, I am devastated because I teach international human rights law, and frankly, the sense of, I've never thought of retirement as much as I have these days, because I just don't know if I can honestly stand before a class of students and tell them that there is such a thing as international human rights. I feel like I'm just selling them absolute BS that I don't believe. But as a Muslim theologian, I am deeply troubled, so thoroughly troubled by, we see solidarity on the part of non-Muslims towards one another all the time. The sheer solidarity that you see, for instance, between people of Europe, or frankly, white people, solidarity between Australia and with sort of the causes of the West, quote unquote. But the lack of moral, what is the word I'm looking for? Adhesion among Muslims is astounding. So as all of this is going on, we still have people who represent major institutions who have been, for the most part, I don't know if you recently heard, for instance, Hamza Yusuf talking about how violence is so horrible, and that the reason that Netanyahu is doing all this to Palestinians is because Palestinians killed Netanyahu's brother. I don't know if you've heard this. Yeah,
I have not heard that. I have not heard that.
Yeah, go look it up.
I think Hamza Yusuf, with all due respect, needs to sit in a course on settler colonialism and understand that Israel is only doing what it's been doing for the last 75 years since its inception. It was determined and it was planned as a settler colony intent on taking all of the land of Palestine, and that until October 7th, it had succeeded in stealing 78% of historic Palestine in 1948, occupying the remaining 22% of historic Palestine in 1967. And after it withdrew its settlers from Gaza in 2005 and began its incessant, every couple of years, aerial bombardment campaigns on Palestinians in that cage, they are now using this as an opportunity to occupy and to steal more Palestinian land. The fact that he is entertaining some bizarre theories that nobody is speaking about and denying the clear facts which indicate that this is a settler colonial project that is being implemented before our eyes for the last 75 years, to me, is severely undermining what I at one point made of his scholarship, because I thought, he's not with us when it comes to actually having a principled position on justice in Islam, but he nevertheless produced some good work. So take the good and leave the bad. But I don't know if I can even make that statement anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what troubles me is the Muslims are thought to be represented by these states and institutions, states that have been created by the colonial legacy, Saudi government, the Egyptian government, the Emirati government, the Moroccan government, the Jordanian government, and we can just go on. And by institutions that, when it comes to Muslims in the West, quite often they are extensions of these governments, like the Emirati government and whatever is Muslim institutions the Emirati government created in the US, and so on. And yet, time and time again, what real life tells us is we have no representatives. No one speaks for Muslims when it really matters. And I think, because often people say, why is the Palestinian cause so essential? Why does it stand out? Why is it? And even we to the point that all of us in the Muslim world, we sat here and saw the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque get violated again and again and again and again, and there's no real reaction. It's not like the world turns upside down because Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, and the Muslims who, for whatever reason, supported Trump continued to support Trump. The Muslims who were Republican continued to be Republican. I mean, I don't know if you've seen this, because maybe you were in France at the time. There were actually Muslims who basically wrote articles saying, Trump is part of Allah's will, and the Muslim ban is not that bad. It's gonna affect some people for a short period of time, but then it will be lifted. And basically whitewashing the whole thing. And as a theologian, I come back again and again, and I ask myself, before anyone else, what is the moral imperative vis-a-vis what must the discourse of intellectual discourse of Muslims be about these states, these governments, these bodies that meet in a summit? And everyone expected the summit to be entirely ineffective, and I don't think anyone was surprised, right? So I don't know, how do you negotiate these things in your mind, Laura? I mean, I often think if I was born a Palestinian and I am, how would I think about all these Muslims that are supposed to be my brothers and sisters?
Well, I think, you know, people always say the people are with you, the governments are not. And, you know, and I believe that. I do believe that. I think that that is true. I think we see strong expressions of solidarity from people, and we have in the mass protests that we've seen worldwide. I think that um, people in the Arab world may be quieter because of the repercussions that they fear if they were to go out in protest. Like, there's not going to be a protest in the UAE or in Bahrain to support Palestinians in this moment, or in Saudi Arabia. It's just not going to take place. Not because I don't think that the people's hearts are not with us. I think because they fear for their own life. Um, and I, you know, and so and so I do believe that we live, unfortunately, in an era of corrupt Muslim rulers. Um, and it's
And
not
how about,
anything and it's not anything that we should necessarily be surprised about, because we were told. I mean, it's in our belief that this era would take place, that the
yeah,
Muslims would,
but
yeah,
there are Muslim fuqaha or theologians. Like, for instance, I mean, just someone, I get, you'll be shocked the number of people since this started that write me and ask me, um, Saudi or Emirati or Egyptian fuqaha have told them, because that's what they're saying on TV, that demonstrating in support of Palestine is haram, that when the ruler have banned the raising of Palestinian flag, the ruler must be completely, absolutely obeyed. And they're asking me whether it is true that it is haram that you demonstrate that, because these fatwa are saying that even demonstrating in the US in support of Palestine is haram. It's not just don't demonstrate in Saudi. And do we answer these? You know, do I sit there and go through the fiqh of answering these, or do I say something is thoroughly wrong with your moral structure? When we
yeah.
find these institutions that are funded by Emirati that claim to train dua, advocates for Islam, and they sit there and they're completely silent. And they're in the US, they're not in the Emirat. But they're completely silent throughout this entire genocide.
You know, I think,
Again, you know, I've often asked myself, if I was born a Palestinian woman, what would I do?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think that their reaction to me is just reflective of the crisis that the Islamic, um, the the status of Islamic education, right? This crisis of where we get our knowledge and what is the content of that knowledge. And it's a serious, serious crisis that people do not realize that the spirit and the heart of Islam is to speak out and to do everything that you can to correct injustice. Like, that is a fundamental, like, baseline problem. You're speaking about your moral framework. Like, there is something deeply, deeply wrong with your moral framework, your understanding of Islam. You don't know what this is all about if you're asking those questions. Because if you're asking those questions, it shows that you don't realize that the whole point of Islam, the whole thing, is about countering injustice in this life and the next. That's it. That's what this whole thing is about. The Prophet, peace be upon him's last sermon was all about injustice. Injustice in terms of racism. Don't be racist. Treat your women well. Don't be misogynist. His whole life was a testament to being on the side of oppressed people.
Right. Yeah.
So if you don't understand that that's what Islam is about, then you don't understand Islam. And when you're asking those questions, you are revealing that your understanding of Islam is so
Absolutely.
contrary to what it is in reality. And that what you learned about what Islam is not the case. And that's my fear. My fear is that there is an entire generation of Muslims that grow up and they learn their faith, and their faith has been reduced to physical movements.
Yep.
It has been reduced to the physical embodiment of prayer without the spiritual understanding of what it's all about, to the deprivation of food and water without understanding what fasting is all about. That is a very serious crisis that we are facing.
Yeah.
And this brings me back to why Usuli is so essential as a resource, because we're reclaiming and correcting the narrative, which again has been distorted. It's in so many of these struggles, like the Palestinian struggle is a struggle for reclaiming the narrative and correcting a deeply distorted narrative. And I think we're facing the same struggle in our Islamic institutions and the transmission of knowledge. It's about correcting the narrative about what this is all about. We have been lied to. We have been told Islam is just 5 pillars without any moral framework. Go to Hajj because it's an obligation. Well, it's an obligation if you are able, and we should query what ability means in that context. Is that condition of ability supposed to take into account moral realities? So are you able to go if the people in power who are taking all of your money are funneling it to Hindu extremists who are slaughtering Muslims? I would argue that possibly you're not able to go in those circumstances. I wouldn't tell anyone not to go, but I think we should at least have the debate about what ability means in that moment. Do you know how many people have told me that I am destroying God's religion by even suggesting that we should talk about whether or not it is actually honoring God's will if we choose to spend tens of thousands of dollars to make Hajj in this moment, when knowing full well where our money is going, and whether that is actually an exercise in purifying ourselves spiritually, or whether we are just doing it to participate in the physical motions of Hajj without any respect or honor for the heart of Islam, which is justice.
Yeah.
Well, we've made that
Yes.
as you may know. I mean, that's, my personal position. And I was happy when Sheikh shared that there are fatwas from our history by learned scholars that, said at those times that no, you shouldn't go to Hajj if you know that money is supporting the killing of innocents. And I think in this case, if the Saudis are not, they make so much money from Hajj, this is at least a way that we can say, no, not with my money. If you're not even going to prevent, like cutting off the fuel or blocking off the airspace, you can't even take that small step. Why should I support you?
There was a clip from us, I believe it was a Saudi representative, who was asked about normalization. And they said to him, is it off the table given recent events? And he said, no, it's on the table. It's still on the table. Obviously, there are some challenges in this moment, but it's still on the table. So, no, I cannot go to Hajj in this moment as a Muslim. I won't even say as a Palestinian. I will say just as a Muslim, I cannot go. I cannot go. I don't shame anybody who decides to go, but I do think that everybody who decides to go should ask themselves if they honestly believe that that is consistent with God's will and consistent with the moral imperative of justice in Islam.
100%.
Laura, I really would love to hear your reaction to this, because this is related still to the issue of the issues that we're talking about. Part of what, you know, when people sit and think about what got us to the point of what happened October 7th and onwards, we systematically all witnessed the Arab world being led by the same powers that stood with Trump in Riyadh, created an institute called I'tidal to quote unquote monitor fanaticism and extremism in the Muslim world. And part of the extremism and fanaticism that was being monitored is the very idea of resisting occupation, is resisting Israel. And that was branded. I mean, at the same time that the Emirat branded CARE, a terrorist organization, and branded Hamas, a terrorist organization, at the same time that Saudi Arabia started arresting people, representative from Hamas, that had been living in Saudi Arabia for 20, 30 years, what the trajectory that all of us saw is a corrupt Palestinian authority that is being paid to basically manage Palestinians as the Israeli colonialism continues to steal more land, to dispossess more Palestinians, to make the disempowerment of Palestinians and the dehumanization of Palestinians even more and more extreme. The entire Sunni world, because we had a question about Sunni versus Shia in, I think, the chat, the entire Sunni world was being led by Saudi Arabia, the Emirat, these trio, and Egypt. And it was quite clear that the plan that they had worked out with the United States and the West is that thing that they were calling the صفقة القرن, the deal of the century, right? And the project of the Neom city and the destruction of Egyptian Rafah and the building of these underground water tunnels that are supposed to take water from the Nile to Israel, built under Sinai, where it was all part of this. And the essence and the heart of it is Israel, go ahead, do to Palestinians whatever you want, violate the Aqsa Mosque as much as you want, go ahead, you have a free hand, it doesn't matter. As we, the rest of us, the rest of the Muslim world being led by the trio, Saudi, the Emirat, and Egypt, we will normalize relations with Israel, open up Arab markets to Israel, force our people to live in normal commerce with Israel, as we all ignore Palestinians. And Israel, reading its cues very well, started brutalizing Palestinians at unprecedented levels. And so, you know, when people say, why is it that, you know, you have Hamas and then Hezbollah and then the Houthis in Yemen and, yeah, you know, Shia Iraq, some Shia Iraqis in Iraq? Well, because the Sunni world has been led post-Arab Spring by Sisi of Egypt, who is absolutely complicit in the Palestinian genocide, the MBS of Saudi and MBZ of the Emirat, and all three, along with whatever American administration was there, were basically saying the Palestinian cause is a thing of the past. Ma salama. Khalas. And these same folks, it seems to be like they're yeah, I don't know if you read this article by what's his name, Dennis Ross, in the New York Times, where he says, and Kushner also was on Fox talking about this, where they basically say, oh, the Saudis basically and the Emiratis and the Egyptians told us, go ahead, destroy, get done, finish off Hamas, and then we can continue on with Safqat, was the center. And so Kushner was saying, as soon as Israel gets done with what it's doing to the Palestinians, we can get down back to business. I don't know. Do people understand that we are seeing treason of I don't know how to describe it. What do you describe? How do you describe this? I mean, am I wrong about any of this, Laura? I mean, am I not seeing something? Am I misunderstanding something?
No, and in fact, the only reason that those individuals remain in power is because they're fully subservient to US interests. If they were not, then they would no longer be in power. And that's the very simple reason why you don't see them take positions which are contrary to US interests and capital and profit. Because any leader who did that in the Middle East is no longer in power. And not only in the Middle East, right? Worldwide. The US has a history of supporting regime change in countries around the world where it did not like the politics of the individual who was in power. And history has many examples of this that we can learn from. So, no, you're not wrong about any of this. And, I would encourage anyone who just wants to understand why Israel's brutality against Palestinians and its land theft is has reached the levels that we have seen, to Google a 2019 paper of the United Nations called "The Economic Costs of the Israeli Occupation for the Palestinian People: The Unrealized Oil and Natural Gas Potential." The West Bank and Gaza are sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars of natural gas reserves and oil. And it is perfectly consistent with US imperialism and colonialism to support Israel as it finishes off the Palestinians and exercises total control over the remaining bits of Palestine that we had in our possession in order to extract from our land this wealth, which should have gone to us, the Palestinians, because it is on our land. This is a UN paper, 2019, right? And by the way, in 2023, just weeks into this genocide of Gaza, Israel issued exploration licenses to the leading oil and gas companies to search for gas that is in the jurisdiction of Gaza. Weeks into this genocide, they quietly issued these exploration licenses. So I think we should always follow the money. Reuters reported it on October 30th. Israel awards gas exploration licenses to Eni, BP, and 4 others to search for natural gas off the country's Mediterranean coast. Where, though? Off the coast of Gaza. That gas belongs to Gaza. But guess who can't actually do anything to even speak up or to try to say, hey, wait a minute, those are our resources? Palestinians, if they don't have any power to do so, which is why it's so necessary for them to eliminate Hamas. It's not because they care about their hostages or because they want to ward off future attacks. It's precisely because they want to eliminate the only possible resistance against this theft of hundreds of billions of dollars of natural resources. It is no coincidence that Israel awarded exploration licenses for Gaza's natural gas during this genocide after a 2019 paper announced that there was hundreds of billions of dollars of natural resources in Gaza and the occupied West Bank. It is not a coincidence. It was announced just weeks ago. So we need to be very cautious as we proceed in digesting the narrative of the corporate media, and we should always follow the contracts.
Yeah.
So you're both lawyers who understand, so deeply and fully the implications, like what you're talking about is, okay, this is really the life and death of the system, rule of law that governs the entire world. And if they fail at this very clear-cut test, what is left? And so what is the point even of when you bring law cases to the ICC or whoever you can go to? I'm not even sure, what is the top governing body, make a decision. What if that fails? And what remains? Because it's like, okay, when I'm listening and I'm thinking, you just keep thinking, okay, what's the solution? Okay, how do we cut the money from, like whether it's people in charge, what are we able to do? Should we bring law cases? Should we, yes, we have to come together. I like, where do we go from here as lawyers? Like I always thought lawyers would, that like law is where power, can affect change. So okay, that's no longer
I'm chuckling. I'm sure Sheikh is chuckling too.
Okay, so as Muslims, then we have these so-called Muslim leaders in charge that are sitting on a gazillion dollars that, quite frankly, probably God sent for us to really change the world Islamically, but now they've been completely co-opted to feed into the whole U.S. Western whatever game. What power do we have as Muslims to affect change within our so-called Muslim leadership? I mean, where, okay, beyond the the power of prayer and the power of coming together to be a voice, like what else can we do? I mean, like I know we can, okay, call upon, Hamza Yusuf should be using his influence and his voice to educate those who trust him implicitly, as with other leaders, but people who love him should call him to account. Same for others who are not, or like what are these bodies that come together that are so-called Islamic bodies that discuss whatever they discuss, or shura councils, or whatever. What is the point of any of that when they can't even influence anything that can bring change? Should we be trying to figure out how do we bring the global south together and create our own new government, our own, how do or is this just going to be a split down the middle? I mean, I don't know. I'm just like a okay, educated layperson, but maybe you guys, from where you're sitting, you guys know how the world works better than I do. I mean, no one
Yes,
has.
you wanna go.
No, I mean, people hear me when I give puzzle and stuff like that all the time. So please go ahead.
I don't have a good look. I don't have a good answer to this, Grace. I mean, I think there are things that are essential. They're not sufficient, but they are essential as a prerequisite. And that is number one, information. Be very cautious about where you get your information from. And I think it's a good rule of thumb that people should be believed about the things that are happening to them. So if they're telling you that we're being genocided and here are the bodies and they're showing them to you, then you should believe them. And you should always be cautious about accepting a narrative from a government, which scholars are in agreement that government is complicit in genocide. Just 2 weeks into this assault, the Center for Constitutional Rights, which is a secular institution, civil rights institution, issued a 44-page legal opinion on Israel's unfolding genocide in Gaza and the US's complicity in that genocide, right? So scholars are a good place to get our information from. And I think oftentimes what we see is there's this total inconsistency between the narrative that is parroted on the megaphones in the corporate media all over the newspapers, and then the actual position of scholars. And when I say scholars, I don't mean only Muslim scholars, I mean scholars of any expertise. So I would encourage people to read the work of scholars, see what genocide scholars are saying, because they're all in agreement right now. The leading human rights organizations in 2020, 2021, and 2022 issued hundreds of pages of reports concluding that Israel oversees an apartheid regime against Palestinians, and that apartheid, of course, as we know, is a crime against humanity. So maybe we should read what they have to say about the situation and wrestle with the facts and the evidence that they have presented instead of just listening to people who have no expertise but have the loudest voices. So I think information, getting your information from the right source, from people who know what they're talking about because they have been there, they have seen Gaza, they know, they have deeply studied the Palestinian issue for 30 years, and they can tell you all about the history, not people who are politicians who haven't studied these things, but who regurgitate talking points. Get your information from the right place. I think having the right information is the essential starting point to any sort of action that we want to be involved in. And I also would say that before we joined today's talk, you had posted on Instagram something that I said in 2021, which I actually don't even remember that I said it, but I read it and I said, wow, I agree with that. And that is that from, we're here in the Asuli Institute. So from a Muslim perspective, dua is not sufficient. Dua is necessary, but action is also necessary. And it's the combination of the two which yields, produces results. Our Islam is not in a vacuum. Our Islam is also how we act in this world and how we behave as human beings who are placed on this earth. Our actions in this world, that is our Islam. I mean, the angels on our shoulders are writing our deeds. They are writing our deeds. They are seeing what we are doing in this world. And so it is not enough to make dua. We must make dua, but it is not enough to make dua. We have to make dua, and we have to do everything in our power to correct injustice on this earth. And we know that there will be a day where there will be true justice. We know that as Muslims. We know that day exists, and we believe in it in our hearts. And we know that there will never be complete justice in this life. We know that. Otherwise, there would be no need for a day of judgment if we could have complete justice in this life. But that is not an excuse to lead us to inaction, right? Sometimes I get this impression when I'm watching Muslims comment on this unfolding genocide, right? There are some phenomenon that I am like observing that I want to speak about. One is this notion that what's happening is part of God's plan, and because it's part of God's plan, well, that's just what's happening, and the oppressors will have their day. Okay, fine and well, but that doesn't absolve you from your responsibility to correct this injustice. And you do have a responsibility, and you will be questioned about that. So you have to do everything in your power, in your circles, in this moment. Otherwise, you are failing the test God created for you. So that's one thing. There's another thing which I have been witnessing, which is Muslims in the comment sections, commenting on the nature of Palestinian steadfastness and belief, and, saying things like, oh, mashallah, like they are so steadfast. And this is just, really, they're superhuman. They're built like in a way to just have this extraordinary belief in God. And subhanallah, like we should just be in awe of Palestinian steadfastness and resilience. And there's something about that which I really just does not sit well with me, because it sort of implies that we are, again, it's inevitable for us to be the victims of genocide, that it's just what must happen. Saying that we have this sort of superhuman quality to absorb injustice is, again, I think, something which drives people to inaction. Well, that's just how it is, right? And no, I can confirm to you that Palestinians would rather be free. We would rather have rights. We would rather be able to live without being subject to genocide. We do not want this to happen. You know, when my family in Gaza is telling me, like, Alhamdulillah, they say it and they believe it because that's the situation that they're in. And they can't change it. There's nothing that they can do from the position that they're in. So that is just how they must respond. But it doesn't mean that they would rather be in that situation than they would be free in this world. And so that's something I've just been really uncomfortable by. I would love to hear Sheikh's views about these sort of phenomenon that we're sort of seeing from Muslims. And I wonder if you've noticed the same thing and if you have any comments on it.
You know, I just if you don't take action, we all know that if you don't take action, your dua is not going to be accepted. So if you know that you are engaging in dua that will not be accepted because you are not acting, then that dua has the status of laghu. Laghu means nonsense, that you are just, which I am I am with the view that it is actually haram. It is taking God for granted. It is a tamanni ala Allah, that you are basically taking God for granted when you do dua, but you are not taking action that would even give that dua the possibility of acceptance. Because then it's literally like those who, say, we will not worship that Allah will forgive us anyway. And that type of that type of dynamic is exactly like that, because you are so for all Muslims, if that's what you do and you just do dua, um, I actually think it's you're better off not doing it, because it's not going to be answered. And if you don't put your money and your effort where your dua is, and look how many times Allah has emphasized sacrifice, that you sacrificed your money and that you sacrifice your effort. I think I mean, all of us. I mean, at a very and there's something that really deeply troubles me about dua. That is, like, for instance, I was listening to a Palestinian doctor in Gaza talking about how there is an outbreak of diarrhea, and all these people are coming, and that they have diarrhea, and uh, they are becoming dehydrated very quickly, and there's simply no medicine, or there's absolutely nothing to give them. And that he's sending away these mothers who are carrying children, coming to him with children who are suffering from diarrhea. And as I had just woken up with a migraine headache. And the first thing, when I get a migraine headache, I'm thinking, I want relief. I want relief. Where's my relief? And before you sit and you do that, do the mathematics. I mean, what is different about you as a human being, where you can be somehow in any way entitled to have relief from illness? That how many of us can be sick and endure without? We think like going to the doctor and getting relief is a matter of right. It's something that we, even if it's delayed, we're outraged. So now thinking of the amount of agony and misery, think, well, how much does this obligate you to act? Because there's a very practical thing. I mean, I see like a lot of people saying, oh, they're complaining about getting fatigue from all the images, or people saying, oh, I've been to this demonstration, I've been to this demonstration, I think I'm going to take a break this weekend. Or with all due respect, I mean, you as a Muslim, you are supposed to put yourself in your sisters and your brothers' shoes, and you are supposed to live their life and feel their feelings and react as if you are but one body. And don't get lost in the meta and mega theories. Focus on I mean, my God, one of the things I don't think I'll ever be able to erase from my mind. I saw this video once, and it was a TV channel called Al Mayadeen that showed it, and they were digging rubble, and they pulled out of the rubble this little girl, must have been 7 or 8 years old, and she's completely covered in dust, and then she utters, when they pull her out of the rubble, shahada, and then she dies. She like mumbles shahada, and there's nothing they can do. They can't resuscitate her. They can't try to do anything. And so, temper, yeah, I even mentioned Palestinian heroism and strength in my khutbah, because I want to honor the victims in any way I can. But for those who start somehow seeing a positive side to the Palestinian plight, and somehow letting that perception of an implied positive side let them off the hook, that's where it gets immoral. And the whole paradigm about dua, just do dua for them. Well, not if basically your thinking is, well, I'll go to, I'll join a demonstration, or instead of even like I was my brother, who's just out of sheer frustration, so he doesn't know what to do. So what he does is that he goes on the net, goes on Zionist sites, and sees what they're saying and starts responding to them. I mean, why? Because he's like done everything else, and he just sits there, and he can't just stand the idea of just sitting there doing nothing. So I respect that more than someone who just sits and says, I'll do that, and then enjoy my meal and enjoy my show, and then go to bed. That's how I feel about that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the notion of you honor somebody's actions more than their words. It's about what you do. It's not about what you say. And Grace asked me about what I thought about Macron, for example, finally calling for a ceasefire after over 11,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed, and including 4,500 children massacred. And I said, it means absolutely nothing to me, because just a week ago, he was in Israel, shaking hands with the leaders of genocide and apartheid, and that France has provided Israel with arms and parts to make arms, which they are using to slaughter civilians. So unless France calls for an arms embargo, unless they stop providing Israel with parts to make weapons, unless they cut ties with Israel entirely, I'm not going to respect the fact that 35 days into a genocide, he quietly called for a ceasefire and barely actually even publicized it on his own state accounts on social media. Because really all it is just an attempt to tame a bit the public perception of him, because there have been protests in France and they have been extremely well attended. And the government's position thus far has been to outlaw any Palestinian protests, citing them as a threat to public order. And so they had to reverse course when they saw that the public position and perception and opinion was so against Israel's aggression. And so then they authorized protests, but then they had to be, approved in advance. And today there was just an enormous protest in Paris that took place. And so again, Macron's words mean nothing because his actions speak very differently than his words. And that's always why these, quiet platitudes or you know, of the United States. Oh, we support a two-state solution. Okay, but everything you have done in your action has undermined what you are purporting to support. You have provided unlimited funding for the settler colony and allowed it to expand settlements which are illegal under international law and which completely block the possibility of a two-state solution happening. $4 billion a year and many billions more just in this genocide were committed to Israel. US warships, planes, weapons. Our family members in Gaza are actually picking up the pieces of the shrapnel from the missiles that have targeted their homes. And we see very clearly that these weapons were manufactured in the United States. We see the names of the weapons manufacturers and the location of manufacture. And the weapons that are being used to kill Palestinian children as they sleep in their homes are manufactured in the United States. So especially for Muslims who live in the US, who pay taxes in the US, I believe it is my opinion that the imperative on them is even greater because they are funding the genocide.
Yeah.
And they have to be aware of that. They have to be aware of that and realize how that hires the standard in terms of what is to be expected from them to do everything that they can to stop it. And if thousands of Jewish Americans are going to go to New York Central Station and get arrested in acts of civil disobedience to say, not in our name, those anti-Zionist Jewish activists who have shown amazing solidarity with us from Jewish Voice for Peace or other organizations, if they are doing that, there is no reason why the Muslim institutions should not be organizing their own actions of civil disobedience. But we have not seen that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well,
So
I-
for
I-
me,
I-
that's, yeah, we're clearly Muslim institutions in the West are failing on this issue. Clearly they are failing. And their failure is mimicking and mirroring the same failure that we are seeing in the Muslim institutions and states abroad, right? It's the same thing. Leadership worldwide has just completely failed on this issue. And the results, the consequences are staggering. I mean, 4,500 babies and children is what we know of, is those who have been pulled from the rubble and identified, not the ones who are still stuck under the rubble. The real cost of this genocide, I don't know that we'll ever know it, because the reality is that we have now reached the phase of genocide where people are dying from disease, from starvation, from dehydration, from the deprivation of the necessities of life, like food and water. And so when we're only counting those who have been killed in airstrikes, we don't really actually know the full magnitude of the suffering and the loss, because we're not actually accurately in numbers representing what is happening to people. People have to understand there's 1 million children in Gaza. That means that 1 million children under our watch have lived under uninterrupted, continuous bombardment for 35 days. It doesn't cease for 1 minute of the day. And in fact, when Israel announced days ago that they would be now enacting a 4-hour humanitarian pause in bombardment, what that actually says to us is that's a confirmation of what Palestinians were telling us, which is that the bombardment was happening for 24 hours a day. So when you announce that now you will be doing a 4-hour break of genocide per day, that means that prior to that, you were bombarding Gaza at every hour of every day uninterrupted for over 1 month. So let's be very clear about that. There's nothing humanitarian in pausing genocide for a few hours. Give us enough time to collect the bodies from the streets before you start again. There's nothing humanitarian about that. Israel told us, according to their own admissions, that they have dropped over 1,000 missiles a day on Gaza. The amount of weapons that were now, bombs that have now been used against Gaza have doubled what was used in Hiroshima. People need to understand that we have now exceeded the devastation of a nuclear bomb twice over in the sheer amount of weapons, of tons of bombs that have been used against the civilian population in Gaza, which has nowhere to go. They are in a cage and they are being exterminated in continuous aerial bombardments for over 1 month. I have noticed that the updates that I am getting from people on the ground are becoming far more infrequent because people are fatigued. They are starving, they are dehydrated, and they have reached the point of the genocide where they're not even able to continue to give us the information about what is happening to them. The updates now I'm seeing are, I'm so tired, I can't even tell you what I saw today. Whereas before, it was every minute I was getting an update about which family's house was hit in an airstrike and how many martyrs there were. And it was very precise and it was very detailed. Now it's you can see the exhaustion just in the way that the people are reporting on the genocide which is happening to them. So again, the stakes have never been higher, whether that be for international secular institutions like the United Nations or the International Criminal Court, or so-called leaders of the free world like the US and the EU, or for Muslims and our institutions. The stakes have never been higher, And the world is going to change because of what we allow to happen to Palestinians in Gaza in this moment. And Sheikh knows very well that any time a state's behavior is not sanctioned, that becomes a new precedent. This is the notion of customary international law, that a source of law under international law is the behavior of states. And if a state carries out a behavior and that behavior is not sanctioned properly, then what that becomes is a new precedent for states going forward to engage in. It's not just a political precedent in the sense of, well, they got away with it, so now I'm going to try and get away with it. No, it actually becomes the law.
Yeah, changes the law. Yeah.
That's this, like, people don't realize, like, that the world that we are going to live in after this genocide is over and the dust settles, we are going back to the rules of might makes right. We are going back to the rules where nothing can stop a people from being genocided. Nothing can stop a people from facing genocide against children. Like, people are not understanding this is the worst kind of genocide. The majority of the victims are children. There cannot be a worse form of genocide.
Like the people who can actually take action on that issue, because I think you're right, like general, average people are not going to understand the legal implications of that, but lawyers do. And there are enough lawyers, and I hope Muslim lawyers, who can take some kind of action on that. It doesn't even have to be Muslim lawyers, just anyone who is on the side of humanism. And I wanted to, even as you're talking about the idea that, how many bombs have been dropped, there's a cost associated. Every single one of those bombs. I heard some crazy number, like it cost what, $1 million. I mean, I don't know what exactly the cost of a bomb is. Somebody must know, and someone must have the capability of tallying, doing that accounting and helping the rest of the world see what that actually costs and what that means in terms of taxpayer money, but even more so what that means in terms of what we as Americans don't get. We don't have free healthcare. Israelis do. We don't have free education. Israelis do. We're not in, but, we're paying. Every bomb that is dropped is paid for by us. And if someone even put that information together and circulated, I've seen some versions of that, but something really like compelling that could also get more allies on our side. It's like, I feel like, everyone, to your point, everyone has something that they can do to make a difference. And Sheikh, I actually want you maybe just to say, we get like messages from people. Someone said, I wanted to hold a vigil, and the Muslims in my area told me that is a bid'ah and didn't want to help me. Okay. I mean, to your point about, if you don't understand that Islam is about justice, then you need to check your Islam. And if you, at this moment in time, don't choose just individual action. If this feels like something humanist, feels like something I can do, you know, God knows my intention, I'm going to do it. I don't need other Muslims to, you know, to hold me back or come up with some stupid, you know, hadith about why I can't create a vigil. I mean, this is like, okay, time to like rise up, be empowered. If you feel you can do something, do it. And I don't know, I mean, so Sheikh, because I feel like so a lot of times Muslims feel hampered. They haven't, you know, there are too many reasons not to do something than actually being liberated and unshackled and set on fire. Go, you know, do it. Now's the time. I don't know if you want to issue a fatwa.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's not even if I mean, if the rule, if I mean, something like that is just sheer stupidity. I mean, and moral blindness, because I can't imagine the people who's going to say holding a visual is a bid'ah are going to, okay, well, you don't want to hold a visual, so are you going to organize your own demonstration? Are you going to go and do what these brave Jewish activists did and occupy the governor's office or something like that? And I'm sure the answer is no. And the people who say something like this is a bid'ah, it's not that they are using the pretense of legal technicalities for moral inaction, and that's really the bottom line. So I'm not even interested in the quality of their so-called legal argument. I mean, because it's not that they're using legal technicalities but fulfilling the moral imperative. They're using legal technicalities and then just, yeah.
It's the opposite. It's actually the opposite. And they're being driven by the technicality as an end in and of itself, as opposed to being driven by the ethics and the value and trying to reach a just conclusion. It's completely flipping the purpose of legal analysis on its head.
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
No, that's, I mean, and you wrote a whole book
Laura,
about this, actually. I was just
no,
going to say, reasoning with God is all about this.
yeah,
So,
I mean, I really, I dream of the day that Muslims in mass would be able to read a book like Reasoning with God and get the message, because we see the result of um I really think of colonized thinking. I mean, our intellects are so
yes.
colonized and tedious and boring, and they're like robotic. They've all become robotic, but not very intelligent robots. I mean, robots maybe can process a lot of data, but we're robots that can't even process data.
But we have to also ask ourselves where our Islamic education is coming from and where the knowledge is coming from that is being transmitted to us. Like, we cannot assume that it is coming from a neutral space, or that
Exactly.
the Islam that we are learning is the Islam that our
Exactly.
ancestors practiced. I think we should be very cautious about that idea of knowledge, and I think we should ask ourselves, like, we always speak about this Islamic golden age, and when you read the scholars of the golden age, they don't sound like the scholars of today, the
Yeah.
so-called scholars of today. So I think we need to read the scholars of the golden age and then understand that the version of Islam that is being presented to us today by the mainstream institutions actually is, in many ways, directly conflicts with the variety in thought and the debate and the issues even that our ancestors were concerned with.
Yeah. No, and I
And
mean,
we have to decolonize our way of thinking as Muslims. We have to understand that the first thing that the colonizers did when they came to Muslim lands was to change the curriculum of the Muslim schools. Like they took ownership over that, and there's a like study the history of Algeria, study what they did, what the French did in Algeria. The first thing they did was they went to the schools. Because they knew that if they wanted to control the people, they had to change their relationship to Islam, because Islam was liberation. Islam was liberation from colonial power. And so you have to change what Islam means if you want to be able to exercise colonial power and domination over people who are Muslim. And that's what they did. And they stripped Islam of its ethical heart. And what they told us Islam was, the teachers that they installed, what they passed on to us generation after generation was the physical, without the heart, the movements, and that was all intentional. That was all by design. Because the reality is that if we still had the heart of Islam, then we would never allow this world that we see now before our eyes, that is full of injustice. We would never allow it. Like there are people that are afraid of speaking up because they're afraid of losing their job. And it is true that people are losing their job, but like, what is this? What has happened to you? Like, what has happened to you as a person with values and morals and a moral compass? Like if it stops at being afraid of the page, losing your paycheck, we know as Muslims that all it is, it comes from God. So like, you will be okay. What's more important is where you stand, in times of injustice. When the dust settles and everything, years from now, and it becomes painfully clear to everybody what has happened in this moment, everybody will say that they were against this, but it won't make a difference at that point. It will be too late. It only matters now when there is a cost. It only matters now where you stand. It doesn't matter that, in 2 or 3 years from now, you recognize that Palestinians were victims of a genocide. No, it doesn't matter. It won't matter then. So yes, there is of course a cost in taking a principled stance. And maybe sometimes you'll be surprised. Maybe you will actually be supported, but you cannot be driven by fear. And if you are, then again, I feel like you have again failed in understanding that as Muslims, our job is only to fear Allah, not fear the creation and whatever tactics they may try to use against us. Because like the whole point of this is that we pass Allah's test in this world and do what he has commanded of us, which is to speak out against injustice and do everything we can tangibly to change that. And so I don't know. I mean, I'm deeply troubled. I'm deeply troubled.
Then I really want to underscore what Laura said, because this is really, I mean, it's amazing that we even if we at some level know it, but we have no longer internalized it. I just want to underscore, colonialism needed to change Islam, because the Islam that existed when colonialism invaded Muslim countries was an Islam that would resist colonialism. So the ethic, in order for Palestine to become colonized into Israel, in order for the French to continue colonizing Algeria, in order for the British to continue in Egypt and Sudan, and then split Egypt and Sudan, in order for everything to happen, they needed to change that. But they knew they couldn't change that by writing their Orientalist books in French or in German or English. They needed to change that by transforming the narrative by Muslim authorities. And they needed to do that by the people who can issue orders to Muslims, the king of Egypt at the time, or the Khidawi that ruled over this territory, or the Khidawi of Tunisia, as he was known at the time. These people needed to be giving the orders to religious institutions to change the curriculum, to demote, to, in other words, weed out the scholars that were still advocating the type of Islam that would resist, and to promote the voices that, like today, voice like Ben Baya, that this is classic. That's the type of voice that in the 18th century and 19th century would have been pushed forward to higher and higher and higher positions until they became the minister of Awqaf, or the Sheikh of Azhar, or the president, the chair of Jamiat al-Qarawiyyin in Morocco, or, you know, all the religious positions. But what is critical here, I mean, and we have very concrete examples. For a scholar, you see, for instance, the unbelievably impactful legacy of an Imam Ali. And I'm not talking about Shia or Sunni. I'm talking about Ali, both for Sunnis and Shiites. The Prophet's cousin, alayhi salatu wasalam, who was a paragon of standing against justice. And he raised his sons on these principles. There's injustice. Islam can never be consistent with justice. That's the whole legacy of Imam Ali. The Islam of today, part of the reason that there is constant drumbeats of demonizing the Shia all over the Sunni world. I mean, even Sunnis that I would very much like to respect are weaned on hating Shia. And within the Sunni narratives, you never hear about the Imam Ali or Imam al-Hussein anymore. I have generations of Sunni Muslims that think that it's okay to be rather impartial about what happened between Imam Hussein and Yazid, and what Imam Hussein's rebellion was all about. So Islam is being gutted and has been gutted. Now, I mean, it's actually a testament to the power of Islam that is being gutted now for centuries. We're talking about consistently at least a minimum of 2 centuries where the internal gutting of Islamic doctrine is taking place, and Islamic educational institutions and Islamic religious institutions. And we get to the point today where you have generations of tons of Muslims. They will look at someone like Ben Baya, who is completely in the pocket of the Emirat, who is completely, is actually given a reward. I don't know, Laura, if you've seen this. Ben Baya was given a huge award by this major Zionist organization, and you have Muslims everywhere say, oh, well, he benefits Islam, he's still a good guy. No, that's the destruction of Islam and what it stands for. Islam was always, as Laura said, was about the mustadafin, that disempowered. Islam was always on the side of the disempowered. Islam was not a faith that just sits on the fence between, and the whole, the whole, what do Hindus have, not classes.
The caste system.
Yeah, turning Islam, or as Islam accepting an actual caste system by saying, oh, the rich are rich because God willed it, and the power are powerful because God willed it, and the ruler of Egypt is the ruler of Egypt because God willed it. All the injustices of the world are there because God willed it, and you as a Muslim, you don't have an obligation to do anything other than to just believe in God's will. That's the embodiment, literally, of colonial Islam. That is exactly the engineering and the crafting of colonial Islam. And I think that nothing is really going to transform. The Muslim world is not going to start emerging out of its subservience and subjugation until in mass people start waking up to this reality and to all the diversions and the distractions. When they get you to focus on hating the Shia, that's a diversion. When they get you to focus on the women and their fitna or women and their hijab, that's a diversion. When they get you to talk about whether music or halal or haram, that's a diversion. You know, all the diversions that want to tell you, don't pay attention to the way we have impoverished your faith and turned it into basically nothing. I mean, why worship a God who doesn't care about justice, but only cares about whether you stand up and prostrate 5 times a day? That's God's big issue. What type of God is that? I mean, a God who looks at what's happening to the Palestinians and says, okay, yeah, that's my will. And I'm not really bothered if you try to, as long as you pray and do dua, then you're okay with me. I'm sorry. I mean, any intelligent, moral human being is not going to worship that God. So there will be an attrition of the best minds and the most moral human being away from the religion, because they're going to say, I can't be part of this religion and respect myself. And we can't lose our best.
Absolutely. So we now have crossed the 9 o'clock marker. And so it's 9:10. I just, let me say one last thing. I want to say.
Can I just ask Laura a really quick question, because I'm dying to ask this question. It's not going to take long.
Yes.
I promise.
Famous
Okay.
last
No, Laura. I mean, I was just wondering, do you get the opportunity to speak in public a lot? I mean, are you invited? Do you get an opportunity to be invited to places like CNN or any? Because I mean, I see you as a very, very effective voice. I mean, alhamdulillah, I think the world of you. You're just very intelligent, very eloquent, and a huge part of our battle is to be heard.
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering about that.
So corporate media had not reached out to me until this latest aggression. And then I received some requests and I have accepted a couple. But I think part of my own, how I have approached the way that I feel I can be most effective is when I attract my own audience. And so that's why for years my work has been, memorialized in my podcast, which has had hundreds of thousands of downloads, and in my Instagram account, which now is nearing almost 300,000 followers. But in a sense, I prefer that because what we have seen in the corporate media has been nothing short of criminal. In fact, the corporate media is also complicit in genocide. And that's not just, fancy words. That's actually also a legal qualification that I am making. You don't have to be a state actor to be guilty of genocide. And so they should also be aware that they are committing a crime in the way that they report on this. And I have colleagues, I have friends and other, Palestinians that I know that do accept those corporate media requests regularly. And, what we have seen has just been their total dehumanization. And it's that attempt to correct that in the moment, which, to be perfectly honest, it's something that it doesn't sit well with me that, somebody is going to try to use me for likes and for views. and bring me on their platform to try to corner me and shame me and degrade me, not because I don't think that I could handle the question, because that's obvious. It's not a question of that. For me, it's more of, I don't feel that I owe someone like that.
Yeah.
I don't owe somebody like that my presence or an explanation, because they're not approaching this in good faith. They're not a good faith actor. They're approaching this in bad faith. So am I really being effective in that moment? I feel like I have been effective on my own platform because people are signing up to listen to what I have to say. Um, it doesn't mean that I won't accept those placements. I think I'm just a little bit more careful about which ones I agree to. And I ask a lot of questions before agreeing to them. I'm not trying to get just any placement so that I can get any time in front of these people, because the reality is that they're not good faith actors. They're just really, really trying to um, continue in their dehumanization of Palestinians. And I don't feel like my humanity is something that's even up for debate.
Yeah.
So I won't debate that. I'm, I want to talk about, um, sorry, I just lost some light here. I don't know if I can get it back, but I want to talk about the injustice. I want to talk about the Nakba. I want to talk about what Palestinians have lived for 75 years. And I want to do it to an audience that sees me as human. So this is it's for the same reason that I don't personally choose to debate Zionists, for example, because again, my humanity is not up for debate, and I don't feel like in debating them that I'm doing anything other than in a way legitimizing their position as sort of an alternative to my position. Right? I
Yeah.
feel like they need to be completely excluded. Israel should be
Yeah.
treated as a pariah state, the pariah that is committing genocide against children, that has driven the UN to call Gaza a graveyard for children. I mean, words like this have not been used in recent memory. So they should be dealt with accordingly. And the only place for them is The Hague, if they will live up to their raison d'etre, which we know,
Yeah.
we have serious reason to believe that they will not, because they
Of
have
course.
continuously failed us for the lifetime of their existence. So to answer your question in a maybe longer way than you than you wanted, I'm not after fame. I'm just after sending the message in a way publicly that I feel like I can, um, where I am respected when
Yeah.
I do so.
I mean, it's such a beautiful response because it really underscores it's like, yeah, my humanity is not what is in question here. And, if we are going to have a dialogue, it should be on dignified, respectful terms, my terms. And, you know, that's such an important distinction to make. And on that note, when we're talking about like decolonization and that people have lost their connection to, the essence and the heart and the message of the Quran, and Islam, I just want to again remind people who maybe have not engaged in this, if you feel that one of the things that you want to do something very important is even to engage the 3-year tafsir that we just completed here, because Sheikh's scholarly voice, his journey, his personal journey, his going down the rabbit holes of all of these things that we just common laypersons have questions about, um all of this was really brought to light through this tafsir, which is monumental. It's unparalleled. If you want to know what God has to say to Muslims in our day and age, and you want to rebuild your Islam from the foundations up, and find a confidence, and clarity that you have never had, I would highly encourage people to start that tafsir journey. I continue to get messages all the time. People who have found it, they've decided to, integrate it into their routine. They watch a little bit of it, each day. they thank us because it's transformative. It's changed their entire orientation. And that's, I think, if nothing else, to strengthen yourself and build yourself. That is an important investment, even in this fight. So anyway, we went over time. Thank you, Laura. This has been truly a gift. Just hearing your voice, knowing what's happening. I know I've seen from some of the comments here, people really are so grateful to hear you. And these gatherings are important, where people feel like connected, and feel like they just need to know, what should we do. So I thank you so much for your time. Sheikh, as always, thank you so much also for the voice of wisdom, and and making it clear, really, action before dua. Or
Uh, uh, Dua might even be haram if you don't take action. That's
yeah,
my view.
I don't
But
think you would.
I just want to join in also thanking Laura, because Laura, I mean, may Allah bless you and empower you, and bless your family. And I one of the things I would love to. I don't know, who knows if we will live long enough to see this, but I would love to see how your daughter turns out. Inshallah, she has a tiger for a mother, and inshallah she'll be a tiger as well.
Inshallah.
And so it just, I kept thinking, like, Allah, am I going to live long enough to see this woman's daughter uh grow up
Her
to be the
father,
fighter?
her father is French Caribbean, so both of her parents, unfortunately or fortunately for her, have the anti-colonial spirit in our blood.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, it promises inshallah to be a tiger. Inshallah. Yeah.
Thank you,
Oh,
Sheikh, and thank you, Grace, and
That's
thank you
so
for
welcome.
Suli Institute for your moral clarity always, but of course, especially in this moment. There needs to be 1,000 more Sulis, in my view. And in fact, there could never be enough, because the work that you're doing is so essential. And I have supported, obviously, the Prophet's pulpit. Um, I think it's also another one of the initiatives by Isuli, which is so essential. And when I wrote my endorsement for it, if I remember correctly, I said that it was going to be essential and foundational in the Islamic education that I pass on to my child. And I feel that way about the entire body of work that Usuli produces. The decolonization of our Islamic knowledge begins in finding trusted spaces and sources of knowledge. And I really, deep in my heart, believe that Usuli is that space, because consistently you have always taken a position consistent with Islamic morality, and that matters. It's all about your actions, and in this case, your words, the words that you're leaving us with, and that you're leaving the next generation with. So, for those also who are new to Asuli, it's my personal endorsement. I don't get paid by you guys. This is just me.
don't get paid
This is
either.
just me. No, nobody here is getting paid. I don't get paid by you guys. I just me as a Muslim American, as a Palestinian American, as somebody who's deeply moved by injustice. That's just my spiel about
Thank
it. So
It means a lot. I mean, we're, so grateful for you, and may God bless you and empower you, give you strength in this really difficult time, to continue being that lifeline for so many on both sides. And inshallah, I hope that, the next time we have a conversation, that maybe there'll be some better news, some hope, some progress. But inshallah, may Allah help all of us find the way that we can make a difference personally. So
I mean,
thank you so much. And love to everyone there. Love to you as you head back
thank you.
across the pond or whatever, back to, you're normally, I know, in France, and here we
Yes.
come you're here in the US, so thank God. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining us, and you know, please spread this conversation, and yeah, may God bless all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank
So
you.
take care. We can I can end this and then we can just connect again.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it's fine. So we can connect again later. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Have a wonderful week, inshallah.